Okay, so imagine walking right into the old family dining room of the White House.
Oh, wow. Right, the historic space.
Exactly. You walk in, you look up, and you see this absolutely mesmerizing, vibrant geometric painting just dominating the entire wall.
It's a total showstopper of a piece.
It really is. But here is the wild part. Now, I want you to consider that the artist who actually created that masterpiece was, well, she was legally forbidden from even stepping foot inside an art museum for a huge chunk of her childhood.
Which is just, I mean, it's so hard to wrap your head around today.
Right, and on top of that, she didn't even begin her career as a full-time professional artist until she was almost 70 years old.
Almost 70. Yeah.
So today, we are doing a deep dive into a really fascinating Wikipedia article. We're exploring the life, the work, and just the massive historical footprint of Alma Thomas.
And it's a timeline that completely shatters our culture's deep, obsession with the youthful prodigy.
Oh,
We are just so used to the narrative of the overnight success, right? The tech founder or the artist who completely changes the world before they turn 30.
dirty under 30 lists everywhere you look.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Alma Thomas, she offers this radically different blueprint for what success actually looks like.
She really does. Our mission today is to uncover how a Black woman living through the Jim Crow era navigated these massive systemic societal barriers to eventually become the very first African-American woman to have her work in the permanent art collection of the White House.
It's an unbelievable journey.
So we are going to dig into the actual mechanics of her art. We'll talk about this brilliant concept of a fermenting period and just how she built an enduring legacy entirely on her own terms.
I love that phrase, fermenting period.
Right. So if you are listening to this right now and you've ever felt, that panic of the clock ticking on your own ambitions, get ready. Because Alma Thomas is about to completely rewire how you look at time.
So to really understand the sheer scale of her late-in-life explosion of color, we sort of have to start back in an environment that was actively hostile to her creativity.
Hostile is definitely the word.
Yeah. She was born in 1891 in Columbus, Georgia, which is,
Yeah.
The Deep South, just a couple of decades after the end of the Civil War.
Right, and the source material points out that from a very early age, she just had this innate, undeniable drive to create things.
She did.
Like she would literally go out behind her childhood home, gather raw clay from the riverbank, and sculpt these intricate little figures and plates.
The drive was clearly there, but the access was completely walled off.
Because of segregation.
Precisely. Because she was a Black child in the segregated South, the local art museums were just strictly off-limits. She was legally barred from entering the very institutions that housed the art she wanted to dedicate her life to.
Which is just a staggering barrier to entry for a kid who wants to be an artist.
Oh, totally.
But the sources also make it really clear that the restrictions weren't just about cultural exclusion, right? They were about literal physical survival.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. Her family was actually doing relatively well financially. I mean, her father was a respected businessman, and her mother was a dress designer.
So they had some standing in the community.
They did, but the racial violence of the era was this constant suffocating threat. The article actually notes a deeply traumatic incident shortly before Alma was born.
The mob incident.
Yes. Her father narrowly survived an encounter with a lynch mob. It was such an intense trauma that the family actually later theorized Alma's partial hearing loss was caused by the sheer fright her mother experienced during that event.
That is a level of ambient daily terror that is just difficult to even comprehend today.
It really is.
It's no wonder her family felt like they had to leave.
And leave they did. In 1907, when Alma was 16 years old, the family made this massive, life-altering sacrifice. They basically packed up and fled the South, moving up to Washington, D.C. They knew they were trading your established upper-middle-class comfort in Georgia to essentially start over from scratch.
But they did it for a very specific reason, according to the texts.
Right. They did it because Washington offered two crucial things. It offered better educational opportunities, and, as Alma later wrote herself, the public libraries in D.C. actually allowed African Americans to walk through the doors.
That's amazing. They traded their entire social and economic comfort for an open library door.
Exactly.
And from the text, it seems like that access to knowledge immediately paid off for her. She takes her first real art classes in high school, and she describes walking into the art room as entering heaven.
Which is such a beautiful quote.
But she doesn't immediately become a painter, does she?
No, actually she didn't. She excelled at math and science.
Yeah.
Her initial dream was to become an architect.
An architect in the early 1900s.
Yeah. But when you look at the landscape of the early 1900s, an African-American female architect was, well, virtually non-existent. The structural pathways just were not there.
So she has to pivot.
She adapts. She gets her teaching credentials and works as a kindergarten teacher for a while. Then, at age 30, she enrolls at Howard University.
Okay.
And in 1924, she makes history for the first time by becoming the very first graduate of Howard University's brand new Fine Arts program.
Okay, wait. Let's unpack this for a second, because this is the moment in the story where the music swells, right?
Right, the triumph.
Yeah. She gets the fine arts degree, she's a total trailblazer at Howard, and you'd expect her to immediately take the New York art world by storm.
But that's not what happens.
Not at all. Instead, she gets a job teaching art at Shaw Junior High School, which was a segregated public school in Washington, D.C., and the article notes she stays there in the exact same classroom for 35 years.
35 years.
I really have to push back here. Teaching middle school for 3.5 decades is grueling, draining work.
Oh, absolutely. It's exhausting.
I'm struggling to see how someone survives 35 years in a junior high classroom without their artistic soul just completely stagnating. How did she not burn out?
Well, what's fascinating here is how we define stagnation versus preparation.
Okay, I'm listening.
To an outside observer, sure, 35 years in one room looks like getting stuck in a rut. But the prominent D.C. art dealer, Thurlow Tibbs, coined a really brilliant term for this specific era of Alma's life. He called it her fermenting period.
Her fermenting period. I actually love that phrase. But practically speaking, what does fermenting actually look like when you're, grading middle school art projects all day long?
It looks like active, relentless absorption. She wasn't just resting or coasting, she was building an infrastructure for herself and for her students.
How so?
Well, while teaching full-time, she organized the first public school art gallery in D.C., so her Black students could see professional art in person. She was giving them the exact access she was denied back down in Georgia.
Oh, wow. That is incredibly powerful.
And for her own growth, she spent her summer breaks traveling up to New York to study at the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
On her summer breaks.
Yeah. She even earned a master's degree in art education from Columbia University. And while she was there, she studied under Tony Sarg, who was widely considered the father of modern American puppetry.
Okay, so she is constantly expanding her toolkit. She's learning spatial design through puppetry. She's absorbing art history in New York, and she's curating galleries in D.C.
Exactly. And perhaps the most crucial part of this whole fermenting period happened in the 1940s when she joined an avant-garde circle called the Little Paris Group.
The Little Paris Group.
Right. Because Black artists were largely shut out of the mainstream white galleries and art associations in D.C. at the time, her former Howard professors, Louis Millou Jones and Celine Marie Taberry, they just created their own thriving underground salon right in Louis's home studio.
So basically, instead of waiting for the establishment to invite them in, they just built their own table.
They did exactly that. They met weekly to paint from live models, passionately critique each other's work, and debate all the latest developments in modern art coming out of Europe.
That sounds amazing.
So to answer your question about burnout, she managed her energy by immersing herself in a community of rigorous intellectual and artistic exchange. The well was just constantly being refilled.
Which brings us to her retirement around 1960. She is, 68 or 69 years old?
Right around there, yeah.
The well is full to the brim. She finally steps out of that junior high classroom and essentially declares, I am a full-time artist now.
And she meant it.
And the article details this incredible transition where she moves away from traditional representational painting to becoming an absolute titan of the color field movement.
True pioneer.
But wait, before we get too deep into that,
Yeah.
for those of us who aren't art historians, what exactly makes a pink and color field versus just, traditional abstract art?
That is a great question. So color field painting emerged in the mid-20th century, and it's characterized by these large, flat expanses or fields of solid color that are spread across or stained into the canvas. The whole idea is to strip away any recognizable subject matter. So no bowls of fruit, no landscapes, no people. The color itself literally becomes the subject.
So the color is the main character.
Exactly. The emotional weight comes entirely from how the colors interact with each other and with the physical space of the canvas.
Got it. But the visual of how she actually created these massive color field canvases is I think it's one of my absolute favorite details in all the source material.
It is so unique.
Because she didn't have some glamorous, cavernous, light-filled studio in Soho, right? She worked out of her kitchen and her small living room.
Or tiny living room.
Yes, she created these brilliant, mathematically precise paintings by literally propping the canvas up on her lap and balancing it against her sofa.
It is such an incredibly intimate, constrained physical space for such monumental, expansive artwork.
It really is. It's like trying to write a Pulitzer-winning novel on a smartphone while riding a bumpy subway.
That is a great comparison.
But I think the physical constraint forces you to be deliberate, right? Because she was balancing these giant canvases on her knees. Every single brushstroke had to be intimately within her arm's reach.
It's extremely physical work.
Which makes me wonder if she is painting these geometric shapes, these vibrant blocks of color that became known as Alma's stripes. How did she keep the lines so clean while balancing a giant canvas on a couch cushion?
Well, that actually brings us to a major divergence between her and her contemporaries.
Oh.
Yeah. During this time, Washington, D.C. had this prominent movement called the Washington Color School.
Mm-hmm.
And most of those painters, who, by the way, were predominantly white men, they achieved their really sharp geometric shapes by applying masking tape to the canvas.
Right, okay. Mechanically, you lay the tape down, it creates a dam that the paint can't cross, you paint over it, peel it back, and boom, you get a razor-sharp, clinical line.
Exactly. It creates a very sterile, controlled, crisp edge. But Alma Thomas rejected the tape completely. No tape. Instead, she would take a pencil and draw these faint, rhythmic, undulating lines across her canvas. And then she would freehand paint her blocks of color inside those pencil lines.
Wow.
And the crucial mechanical difference here is that she didn't even erase the graphite. If you walk right up to her original paintings in a museum today, you can still see the pencil marks right underneath the acrylic and oil paint.
Oh, that completely changes the feeling of the work, doesn't it?
It really does.
Like the masking tape sort of removes the artist's hand from the process, but leaving the pencil lines leaves a literal trace of her physical presence.
Yeah.
It breathes.
Gives her edges a vibration, a really human quality that the tape users completely lacked. And she applied this technique with a fearlessness that just bordered on brilliant audacity.
Give me an example.
Take her 1963 painting, Watusi, Hard Edge. She took a very famous cutout artwork by the revered French master Henri Matisse.
The snail, right?
Yes, the snail, which was this collage of jagged, spiraling colored paper. Thomas took that exact composition, but she painted it instead of collaging it. She shifted the colors to these high-key, incredibly vibrant tones, and then she named it after the Watusi.
Wait, the Watusi? Like the pop dance craze sparked by that Chubby Checker song?
The very same.
Taking a revered European masterwork and slapping a rock and roll dance title on it, wasn't the art establishment completely offended by that? How did she get away with that in the early 1960s?
She got away with it because she wasn't asking for permission to participate in their hierarchy.
I love that.
By merging Matisse with a contemporary black pop culture dance, she was collapsing that artificial boundary between high European art and low popular culture. She was establishing her own visual language entirely on her own terms.
So, what does this all mean in the broader context? Because, we can't talk about the 1960s without acknowledging the historical reality of the era.
Absolutely.
The United States is going through just tectonic social upheaval. The civil rights movement is at its absolute peak.
Right. And Alma Thomas was not physically removed from this reality at all. In 1963, she marched in the Monumental March on Washington alongside her friend, the opera singer Lillian Evans.
She was right there in the mix.
She was. She even painted the event, an artwork that later actually became a U.S. postage stamp.
But her core body of work, the vibrant abstract flowers and the cosmic scenes, it didn't look like the typical protest art of the era. And the Wikipedia article highlights a really interesting tension here regarding the Black arts movement.
It does. And I think it is really important we look at both sides of this philosophical split exactly as the texts present them. We're not taking sides here, just looking at the history.
Right, of course.
So during the 1960s and 70s, the Black arts movement was gaining immense traction. The sources explain that many younger African-American artists argued passionately that art should directly reflect the struggle for civil rights.
It should be a weapon, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They were producing these powerful representational works depicting racial trauma, the fight for equality, and the really harsh realities of systemic oppression. They viewed art as an essential, direct tool for social mobilization.
Right, and according to the article, this led to some critique of Thomas from within the community.
Yes, it did.
There were voices arguing that an older black woman who had survived decades of Jim Crow segregation shouldn't just be painting, abstract canvases inspired by the sun hitting a holly tree outside her window.
Right.
The critique was basically that her art wasn't overtly political or black enough because it didn't center the trauma of the era. And again, to our listeners, we aren't endorsing one side of this debate over the other, but the source material presents a very clear ideological clash about the duty of the artist.
Absolutely. The tension there is profound. On one side, you have a movement arguing that identity necessitates a specific, politically engaged subject matter.
And on the other side,
You have Alma Thomas, who explicitly addressed this critique through her writings. The article actually quotes her stating, "Through color, I have sought to concentrate on beauty and happiness in my painting rather than on man's inhumanity to man."
rather than on man's inhumanity to man. So she is acknowledging the darkness, she knows it's there, but she's consciously choosing not to center it on her canvas.
Exactly. She also wrote, "Creative art is for all time and is therefore independent of time, independent of age, race, and nationality."
Wow.
The text suggests that Thomas felt the highest form of artistic freedom was the right to paint universal concepts like light, nature, and the cosmos, without being forced into a box by either the white art establishment or her peers. She believed her use of color was a universal human right.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because her insistence on painting her own unique vision, after spending 35 years building that foundation, it triggers this unprecedented wave of late-in-life success.
The statistics are just staggering. In 1972, at the age of 81, she was given a solo exhibition at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York.
At 81.
Yes, she was the very first African-American woman to ever receive a solo show at the Whitney.
And the New York critics were just floored by it. The article mentions they called her the Signac of current color painters. For our listeners, remind us how the French painter Paul Signac worked and how that connects to what Thomas was doing at 81.
So Paul Signac was a pioneer of pointillism.
The little dots, right?
Exactly. Pointillism is a technique where, instead of mixing paint on a palette, the artist applies small, distinct dots or strokes of pure color directly onto the canvas. And then the colors blend optically in the viewer's eye.
Ah, I see.
The critics were noticing that Thomas had evolved her geometric stripes into a kind of energetic mosaic of distinct color strokes, very much like the pointillists, but on this massive modern scale.
And she applied that technique to some wildly forward-looking subjects. I mean, she didn't just paint her garden. The sources note she watched the 1969 Apollo moon landing and was so inspired that she created the Space, Snoopy, and Earth series.
It's incredible.
She is in her late 70s, looking up at the sky and translating the atmosphere of Mars onto a canvas in her living room.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, she is entirely dismantling the societal narrative of aging.
She really is.
We are so conditioned to believe that aging is a process of narrowing your horizons, of slowing down. But Alma Thomas was expanding her horizons to literally encompass the cosmos.
And that fierce independence wasn't just on the canvas, it was woven into her personal life, too.
Oh, definitely.
The text includes this interview from 1977 where a New York Times reporter asked her why she never married. Her response is just iconic. She said she was only ever married to her art, and then she asked, "What man would have ever appreciated what I was up to?"
She completely rejected the domestic expectations placed on women of her generation. She knew her worth, and she guarded her creative time with absolute ferocity.
It gets even better. She spoke about why she kept her maiden name, noting that she was proud to have Miss on her tombstone. She said, "I say that Miss stands for all the jackasses I missed in life."
She was wonderfully unbothered by societal norms.
Utterly unbothered.
But to really understand her legacy, we have to look at how the institutions eventually caught up to her vision. We are talking about market and historical validation that puts her in the highest echelons of American art.
Right. Like in 2021, one of her paintings, Alma's Flower Garden, sold in a private sale for $2.8 million.
Which is a massive validation from the contemporary art market. But there is a much more symbolically powerful acquisition we need to discuss.
The White House.
Yes.
In 2015, during the Obama administration, her 1966 painting Resurrection was acquired and prominently hung in the old family dining room. Alma Thomas became the very first Black woman to have her artwork enter the permanent collection and be displayed in the public spaces of the White House.
Just think about the historical poetry of that arc.
It's unbelievable.
A woman born in Georgia just a generation after slavery, who was legally barred from walking into a museum as a child, has her vision of universal beauty permanently cemented in the highest house in the land.
Full circle.
The New York Times art critic Holland Cotter described her work in the White House beautifully. He called it forward-looking without being radical, post-racial, but also race-conscious.
Post-racial, but also race-conscious. That perfectly encapsulates the philosophical tension we discussed earlier, doesn't it?
It does.
She didn't ignore her identity, but she absolutely refused to let it limit her exploration of universal light and color.
Exactly. She proved that true creative energy, the kind she carefully nurtured during all those decades teaching junior high, it cannot be destroyed by circumstance. It can be stored, it can be refined, and it waits for the precise moment to be released.
Which brings us back to you, the listener. The timeline of Alma Thomas forces us to question our modern obsession with overnight success. The sources suggest that deep, enduring innovation often requires decades of hidden infrastructure building.
Decades of it.
So if you feel like you're stuck in a holding pattern or you're working a day job while your true passion sits on the side, you aren't necessarily stagnating. You might just be in your own fermenting period.
You are gathering the ingredients.
Exactly. Absorbing the world and building the capacity to eventually execute your vision.
That is the crucial takeaway. And this actually raises an important question in architectural detail from the sources that I really want to leave you with today.
Okay, what is it?
We talked earlier about how her family fled the South and moved to Washington, D.C. in 1907. Well, they moved into a house on 15th Street. And aside from a few brief periods away for her education, Alma Thomas lived in that exact same house until she died in 1978.
Wait, so she was in that same house for over 70 years?
Over 70 years. She spent nearly an entire century looking out of the exact same living room window, from the horse and buggy era all the way to the Apollo moon landings.
That is wild.
For most people, staying tethered to one single physical location for a lifetime would feel incredibly restrictive. But for Alma Thomas, that deep familiarity didn't trap her. It provided the root system and the safety she needed to completely free her mind.
Wow.
From that one small, familiar living room, she painted the cosmos, the moon, and the boundless energy of the universe.
So as you go about your day today, look around. Think about the routines or the spaces you assume are holding you back. What familiar window in your own life might actually be your portal to the stars?